The arena of ash and steel. The sound of the crowd was like a living beast. It growled, roared, and hissed from every direction, a wave of noise that pressed against Kyle's ears. Above him, the sky was hidden by a ring of black stone walls. Firelight danced on their jagged edges, casting long shadows across the sand. The air smelled of dust, smoke, and something metallic, like blood. Kyle stood in the center of the arena, the fine desert grit already clinging to his boots and the knees of his torn trousers. He had been brought here at dawn with no explanation, no trial, no choice. The chains around his wrists had been removed only moments ago. Now his hands hung loose at his sides, but he knew they would not be free for long. He was a stranger here, the only human in a world of giants. The crowd was made of warriors, tall, muscular beings with bronze skin and ridged foreheads, their bodies marked with scars and ceremonial paint. Their armor shone in the torchlight, plates of black steel polished to a mirror's gleam. They shouted in a language Cale barely understood, but the tone was unmistakable. Mockery, challenge, hunger for a show. From the far end of the arena, a massive iron gate began to rise. The grinding sound echoed through the stadium. Behind it, a figure appeared, taller than any man Cale had seen. She moved with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who knew all eyes were on her. Jara. Her name had been whispered to him by one of the guards when they'd dragged him here, the daughter of the High Warlord. Her armor was black and red, engraved with curling patterns that caught the firelight. In her right hand she carried a mace, a brutal weapon with a head like a cluster of jagged iron stars. The crowd cheered her name. Some bowed as she passed. Others stamped their feet in unison, the sound shaking the ground. She did not smile, but her golden eyes burned with something sharp, pride, and perhaps cruelty. Kyle's throat felt dry. He didn't know why he had been chosen for this spectacle. All he knew was that every muscle in his body told him to run. But the walls were too high, the gates too heavy, and the spears of the guards too close. Jara stopped a few steps away from him. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his thin frame, his plain earth clothes, the dirt smeared across his skin. A slow smirk curved her lips. "You are the one they call human," she said, her voice carrying easily across the arena. Cale swallowed but said nothing. She lifted the mace with one hand and let its heavy head hang in the air between them. "In my people's tradition," she said, "there is a simple way to measure strength. Hold the mace of trials. If you can keep it in your grip without falling, you are worthy to stand among warriors. If not—" Her smile sharpened. "You are nothing." The crowd erupted with laughter. Some shouted in their language, words Kyle could not catch, but whose meaning was clear enough from the tone. They wanted to see him humiliated. Jara took a slow step closer and extended the weapon toward him. The mace's shaft was thick and wrapped in leather darkened by years of use. The head gleamed like a predator's teeth. Even from where he stood, Cale could tell it was heavy. Too heavy. She shoved it into his hands. The weight slammed down on him instantly, forcing his knees to bend. His arms strained as if a mountain had been dropped into them. Pain shot through his shoulders. His first instinct was to drop it, to let the weapon crash to the sand, to save himself from injury, but he saw their eyes, hundreds of golden eyes watching, waiting for him to fail, laughing before he even did. Kyle gritted his teeth. He thought of Earth, of long days in the summer heat, carrying sacks of grain for his family when the farm machines broke down, of nights spent hauling crates in the city docks just to afford rent, of the storms, the hunger, the weight of survival. He had carried heavier burdens than this. Slowly, he straightened his legs. His arms trembled, but he tightened his grip until the leather bit into his palms. The mace didn't drop. The laughter died. Jara's smirk faded. She tilted her head, studying him as if she had not expected this outcome. Around the arena, murmurs replaced the jeers. Some of the older warriors leaned forward, whispering to one another. Kale didn't understand the words, but he felt the shift in the air, something deeper than surprise, something like recognition. Minutes passed. His arms burned, his heartbeat thundered in his ears. But still, he held the mace. And in that moment, without knowing it, Kale had crossed a line. Tradition had been invoked. Fate had been sealed. The crowd no longer saw a helpless stranger. They saw the beginning of something they could not yet name. The weight of tradition. The silence in the arena was heavier than the mace in Kale's hands. He didn't know why the crowd had gone quiet, why the mocking voices had turned into hushed whispers. All he knew was that every muscle in his body screamed in pain. His arms felt like they were on fire, his shoulders like they might tear apart. Still, he held on. Dropping the mace now would feel like giving them permission to laugh again. On the high stone platform above, the High Warlord himself stood. His armor was plated with silver, his cape black as midnight. He said nothing, but his sharp eyes followed every movement Kale made. Beside him, a group of elders sat in carved thrones, their faces hidden by long ceremonial masks shaped like beasts. They spoke in low voices, but the crowd could not hear them. One elder leaned closer to the warlord. His voice, deep and slow, carried across the stone to the other council members. "It is the sign," he said, "the prophecy of the off-worlder." Another elder shook his head. "It is coincidence, nothing more. Look at him, skinny, untrained. He will not survive the trials." But the first elder's gaze never left Kale. "Survival is not the test. The will to lift is the mark." Kale didn't understand their words, but Jara did. She stood a few steps away, her arms folded, her golden eyes locked on him. She had wanted to embarrass him, to show the crowd that the strange human was nothing but a weak outsider, but now something in her chest tightened. She hated to admit it, but there was respect in the way he refused to give up. The crowd began to murmur louder, their whispers turning into excited calls. Words like trial, fate, and right of challenge passed from mouth to mouth. Kale's knees bent slightly under the weight. Sweat dripped from his temple and fell into the dust. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. Then, without warning, a horn sounded, a deep, booming note that rolled over the arena like thunder. The gates clanged shut. The laughter was gone now, replaced by a tense, expectant energy. Jara stepped forward and took the mace back from him, her strength making the heavy weapon look like a child's toy in her hands. She leaned in close so that only he could hear her. "You have no idea what you've done," she said softly. Kale met her gaze. "Guess you'll tell me." Her lips twitched into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "You've invoked the right of the mace. In our law, only one who can lift it may face the trials of blood, and the one who survives them can claim the throne." Kale blinked. "Throne? I don't want your throne." "It doesn't matter what you want," Jara said. "Tradition does not care. You have accepted the challenge in front of the entire city. If you refuse, they will call you a coward. A coward's death is slow and public." Two armored guards appeared on either side of him, gripping his arms. The crowd roared again, not with laughter but with excitement. They had just seen the start of a story their people would tell for generations. The warlord raised his hand, and the noise died instantly. His voice was deep and commanding. "The off-worlder has lifted the mace of trials. By the ancient law, he will face the 3 trials of blood. In 3 days' time, the arena will decide his fate." The crowd erupted again, their cheers shaking the ground. Kyle's stomach sank. He didn't even know what the trials were, but judging by the way the people shouted for blood, They weren't games. As the guards dragged him toward the fortress gates, he caught one last look at Jara. Her face was unreadable, but as their eyes met, she spoke in a low voice only he could hear. 3 days, she said. Eat well, sleep if you can, and if you're smart, don't die in the first one. Kale didn't answer. His mind was already turning, searching, for a way to survive something he didn't understand. Inside the fortress, the air was cooler but carried the same metallic tang. The corridors were lit by flickering torches, the shadows crawling along the walls like living things. The guards pushed him into a small stone cell and slammed the iron door shut. Alone in the dark, Kale sank onto the narrow cot, his arms still aching from the mace's weight. He had no allies here, no weapons, no plan. But he had one thing: stubbornness. The same stubbornness that had kept him alive through storms, hunger, and loss on Earth. He didn't know if that would be enough. Outside, somewhere in the city, a bell tolled 3 times. The people celebrated the beginning of the trials. Kyle closed his eyes and told himself one thing over and over: don't give them the satisfaction of watching you break. Whispers of the prophecy. Night fell over Korthar like a heavy cloak. The torches of the great arena still burned, their green flames flickering in the wind, but the stands were empty now. The echoes of the crowd had faded into silence, replaced by the distant hum of the city. Somewhere far below those stone walls, in a narrow cell, Kyle sat awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. He could hear the faint drip of water from the corridor. Somewhere beyond, boots clicked against stone. The guards moved like clockwork, changing shifts with the precision of soldiers who feared their commanders more than the enemy. Kale's arm still ached from holding the mace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those golden alien eyes staring at him, half mocking, half curious. He didn't know what these trials of blood were, but he knew one thing. If the crowd was this excited, the trials weren't meant for survival. Far above him, in the council chamber, the elders had gathered again. The room was circular, the floor made of polished obsidian that reflected the torchlight like dark water. At the center sat the High Warlord, his armor removed, but his presence no less imposing. Around him, 5 elders wore the ceremonial beast. Masks: lion, serpent, wolf, raven, and bull. The elder in the raven mask leaned forward. His voice was low, sharp, almost cutting through the air. You all saw it. The Mace of Trials does not lie. No outsider has ever lifted it. The elder in the bull mask scoffed. And yet you believe this fragile off-worlder is the one from the old songs? A man of flesh so soft a spear could pierce him in one strike? The raven mask elder's eyes gleamed behind the carvings. Strength is not only muscle. Will is its own kind of power. The prophecy says, in the age of shadow, an outsider will lift the weight of the people, and the fate of the crown will change forever. The serpent mask elder hissed. Prophecies are wind. I say let the trials decide. If he dies, the people will forget him. From the shadows, Jara stepped forward. She had not been invited to speak, but she was the warlord's daughter. None dared stop her. He is different, she said slowly. When I gave him the mace, I expected him to fall to his knees in the first breath. He did not. He looked at me as if the weight meant nothing to him. No fear in his eyes, only refusal. The wolf mask elder tilted his head. You admire him? Her jaw tightened. I respect the fight in him, but that does not mean he will live through the first trial. The warlord finally spoke. His voice was deep, a slow rumble that made the flames tremble. Enough. The law is clear. He lifted the mace, and so he will face the trials. If he survives, then we speak of prophecy. If he dies, the sand will drink his blood, and our people will cheer. The elders bowed their heads. The matter was settled. But, in her heart, Jara felt an itch of curiosity she couldn't shake. She told herself it was only because the human had surprised her. Yet she found herself walking toward the dungeons after the council meeting ended. The corridors were silent, except for her armored steps. When she reached Kale's cell, he was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his eyes open in the dim torchlight. "You don't sleep," she said. "Not when I'm in a cage," Kale replied. She studied him for a moment. "Do you even know what you're facing?" "Not exactly," he admitted. "But I've got to guess it's not a tea party." Her lips twitched in a faint smile, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "The first trial is the pit of beasts," she said, at last. "You will be thrown into the arena with creatures that have been starved for days. No weapons but what you can make from the arena itself." Kale's brows drew together. "And if I win?" "You go to the second trial," she said simply. "And each one after will be harder. Few reach the third. None survive all three, except my father." "Then I guess I'll be the second," Kyle said, his voice calm but steady. For the first time, Jara didn't have a ready answer. She stared at him for a long moment before turning away. "3 days," she said again, her voice lower now. "Don't waste them." When she was gone, Kale leaned his head back against the wall. He didn't know if he could fight beasts the size of houses. He didn't know if he could survive this alien tradition. But something in him refused to bow. The same stubborn fire that had made him lift the mace in the first place. Above him, the city slept, but in its highest towers, the story of the human challenger was already spreading. Some spoke his name with scorn, others with hope. And somewhere in the city's oldest library, a forgotten page of prophecy trembled in the wind from an open window, as if the words themselves knew they were about to come true. The first trial. The pit of beasts. The morning of the first trial came with a sound Kale would never forget, a single deep horn that shook the walls of his cell. The sound seemed to crawl into his bones. The guards appeared moments later, tall shadows in the dim torchlight, their armor clinking like chains. "On your feet, off-worlder," one of them growled. Kale stood, his stomach tight, but his mind steady. He had spent the past 3 days pacing the small cell, stretching his muscles, eating every scrap of food they brought him, and running through possible scenarios in his head. He didn't know what the beasts would look like, but he knew one thing. Brute strength wasn't his weapon. His mind was. They led him through the winding stone corridors until he could hear the roar of the crowd above. It was louder than before, like a storm breaking over the city. Sunlight poured through the iron gates ahead, blinding after the darkness. When Kale stepped into the arena, the noise doubled. Thousands of alien faces stared down at him. Some shouted curses, others simply watched, their expressions cold and expectant. Jara stood on the high platform beside her father. She wore no helmet today, her golden eyes following Kale's every step. She didn't wave, didn't speak, but there was something in her gaze, an unspoken challenge. The ground beneath Kale's boots was sandy and dry, the kind of sand that slid under your feet and made you slower. Around the edges of the arena were jagged rocks and broken pillars, remnants of past battles. Overhead, the sun burned like fire, making the air shimmer. The High Warlord rose to his feet, his voice booming across the arena. "By the law of our ancestors, the first trial begins. Let the pit of beasts decide the worth of the challenger." A massive gate on the far side of the arena groaned open. Darkness yawned inside, and for a moment there was silence. Then came the sound. heavy, slow footsteps, and a low growl that rumbled through the ground. The first beast emerged. It was the size of a small car, covered in thick black scales. Its eyes glowed faintly red, and long tusks curved upward from its lower jaw. Its tail, covered in bone spikes, dragged across the sand. Behind it, a second beast appeared, slimmer but faster, with claws like hooked knives and a long, narrow snout full of jagged teeth. Both creatures looked half-starved, their ribs visible beneath their armored hides. The crowd roared for blood. Kale took a slow step backward, his eyes scanning the arena floor. The beasts began to circle him, one moving. Left, the other right, their growls growing louder. His mind worked fast. 2 enemies. Different strengths, different speeds. I can't fight them head-on. I need to make them fight each other. The faster one lunged first, claws slashing through the air. Kale dove to the side, rolling in the sand. The crowd jeered at his retreat, but he ignored them. His hand brushed against something, one of the broken pillar stones sharp on one side. He grabbed it, feeling the weight. Not much, but enough. The larger beast charged next, its tusks aimed to gore him. Kale darted sideways again, forcing it to collide with one of the standing pillars. Stone cracked, dust filling the air. The faster beast, blinded for a moment, swiped wildly, and its claws raked across the larger beast's leg. The larger beast bellowed in rage, spinning to face its companion. Kale's heart pounded. Good. Let them turn on each other. He ran toward the far edge of the arena, staying just out of reach, throwing small rocks to keep their attention split. Every time one moved toward him, the other tried to block it. The tension between them grew until the faster one lunged again, this time aiming for Kale, but striking the bigger one's wounded leg. The bigger beast roared and slammed its tusks into the smaller one's side. The fight Kale had hoped for began. They tore into each other, dust and blood flying. Kale kept moving, staying behind broken pillars, watching for the moment he could end it. Finally, the smaller beast staggered, its legs unsteady. The larger one loomed over it, breathing hard. That's when Kale moved. He sprinted toward the jagged pillar he'd seen earlier, the broken stone sharp like a blade. Grabbing the rock shard, he ran at the larger beast's blind side and drove the shard into its eye with all his strength. The beast screamed, thrashing violently. Kale dove away just as it collapsed, its massive body crushing the smaller one. Beneath it, the crowd erupted, half in shock, half in approval. Kale stood in the center of the arena, covered in dust and sweat, breathing hard but alive. He looked up toward the high warlord's platform. The warlord's face was unreadable, but beside him, Jara's lips curved into the faintest smile. The horn sounded again. The trial was over. Kale had survived the pit of beasts, but as the gates opened to take him back to the dungeons, one thought stayed in his mind. If this was the first trial, what kind of monsters waited in the next 2? A fragile alliance. The cell door closed behind Kale with a heavy clang, but the guards didn't chain his hands this time. That alone told him something had changed. He sat on the cot, his breathing still uneven from the fight in the arena. Every muscle sore and aching. The images replayed in his mind. The beast's snarls, the roar of the crowd, the moment the larger creature's body collapsed in a cloud of dust. He had survived. But the victory didn't bring relief. Instead, it felt like he'd just stepped deeper into a pit he couldn't climb out of. Outside his cell, the fortress hummed with life. Servants hurried through the halls carrying trays of food. Warriors sharpened their weapons, and voices echoed in the great chambers. Kale could hear fragments of conversation, his name muttered in disbelief or spat like a curse. Hours later, the sound of boots stopped outside his cell. The door swung open, and Jara stepped in. She was without her armor this time, wearing A simple dark tunic, but the golden fire in her eyes was the same. "You fought like someone who's done this before," she said. Kale looked up at her. "If you mean running for my life, yes. I've had practice." A hint of a smile flickered on her lips before vanishing. She walked to the corner of the cell and leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "The council is divided," she said. "Half of them want you dead before the next trial. The other half want to see how far you can go." "And you?" Kale asked. Her gaze was steady. "I want to know what you're capable of." He studied her for a long moment. "Why?" "You're the warlord's daughter. You've got everything. What difference does it make if I live or die?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the narrow window high in the wall, where the night sky peeked through. "I've spent my life surrounded by men who only understand strength, through size and muscle. But my father, he earned his throne by outthinking every opponent. When you made those beasts fight each other, you reminded me of him." Kale leaned forward. "And that's why you're here? To compare me to your father?" "No," she said simply. "I'm here because the second trial is worse than the first. If you face it unprepared, you'll die before the crowd finishes." Cheering. She reached into the folds of her tunic and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. She placed it on the cot beside him. He unwrapped it to find a strip of flexible metal, sharpened to a fine edge on one side. Not much bigger than his hand, but it was a weapon. "Smuggle this into the arena," she said. "You'll need it." Kyle frowned. "Why help me?" Her expression was unreadable. "Because if you win the trials, you'll have the right to choose the throne. And I'd rather see that power in your hands than in the hands of certain others." Before he could ask more, she pushed away from the wall. "Eat. Rest. The next trial begins at dawn." That night, Kyle couldn't sleep. He turned the small blade over in his hands again and again, feeling the edge, weighing its usefulness. It wasn't much, but it meant Jara saw him as something more than an outsider. Or maybe she was just using him. He couldn't tell yet. Far above his cell, in the council chamber, the elders argued again. The Wolf Mask elder wanted Kale pushed, harder, to see if he broke. The Serpent Mask elder demanded the second trial be changed to something deadlier. The Raven Mask elder, however, spoke in a voice that carried through the chamber. "The people watch him now," he said. "If he dies too soon, they will not forget, and they will ask questions we cannot answer." The High Warlord listened in silence, then finally spoke. "The trials remain as they have been for centuries. If the human survives the second, then the third will decide his worth." In the early hours before dawn, the guards came for Kale again. As they led him through the cold stone halls, he glanced up at the platform where Jara stood, already armored and watching. Their eyes met for just a heartbeat. No words were spoken, but the meaning was clear. "I've given you a chance. Don't waste it." Kale stepped into the blinding sunlight of the arena, the crowd's roar crashing over him like a wave. This time, the sand was marked with strange patterns, circles, pits, and narrow trenches. Across from him, massive iron doors began to open. The second trial was about to begin, and for the first time, Kyle wondered if Jara's help would be enough to keep him alive. The final trial, duel with the warlord. The second trial had left Kale battered, bloodied, and exhausted, but alive. Word of his survival had spread through Korthar like wildfire. Some called him the Defier. Others spat his name like poison. And now, just 2 days later, the horn sounded again, summoning him for the final trial. There was no mystery, this time. Everyone in the city knew what the last test was, a duel with the High Warlord himself. When the guards came for him, Kale stood ready. Jara had visited him the night before, her words short but heavy with meaning. "He is stronger than anything you've faced, but strength is not all he has. Do not fight him on his terms. The walk to the arena felt different now. The mocking jeers that had followed him before were gone, replaced by a deep, expectant hush. The people had seen him survive what should have killed him twice. They were curious. Some even wanted him to win. The sun blazed high above when he stepped onto the sand. The arena was bare this time. No rocks, no pits, no obstacles. Just an open circle under the burning sky. At the far end, the High Warlord entered. He wore silver armor that gleamed like a blade, each plate engraved with symbols of past victories. In his hands was a long, curved sword, its edge glowing faintly, with the energy of ancient forging. His presence was so commanding that the crowd fell silent without a word from him. He stopped in the center and looked at Kyle with eyes as sharp as his weapon. "You have faced beasts and traps," he said, his deep voice carrying across the arena. "But now you face me. There will be no tricks, no escape, only victory or death." Kyle took a deep breath. His weapon was the small blade Jara had given him, hidden against his forearm. Against the warlord's sword, it was almost laughable, but Kale knew if he tried to match strength with this man, the fight would be over in seconds. The horn sounded. The warlord moved first, his steps, surprisingly fast for a man in full armor. His sword swept down in a blinding arc. Kyle dove to the side, rolling across the sand. The blade struck where he had been, the impact sending a shockwave through the ground. Kyle circled, forcing the warlord to turn with him. He remembered Jara's words. Don't fight him on his terms. The warlord wanted a direct fight, power against power. Kale would give him movement, speed, frustration. He darted in close, slashing with the small blade, but the warlord blocked it with ease, the force of the parry nearly knocking the weapon from Kale's hand. A quick kick sent Kale stumbling backward, his ribs aching from the impact. The crowd roared, sensing the end, but Kale wasn't done. He began to feint, drawing the warlord into striking faster, harder. Each time, Kale just slipped away, making him overextend by an inch. The silver armor was strong, but it was also heavy. Sweat began to glisten at the edges of the warlord's jaw. Kale spotted it, a seam at the back of the armor's right knee. Small, but open. He just needed the right angle. The warlord lunged again, sword raised high. Kale rolled beneath the strike, came up behind him, and drove the small blade into that seam with all the force left in his body. The warlord roared in pain, staggering. Kale didn't hesitate. He grabbed the sword as it fell from the warlord's grip, spinning with its weight until it was in his hands. For the first time, the crowd fell utterly silent. Kale stood over the warlord, the glowing sword pointed down. He could end it here. By law, by tradition, he had earned the right to take the throne. Instead, Kale stepped back and lowered the blade. His voice carried through the silence. "I didn't come here to rule," he said. "I came here to survive. But your people deserve a leader who fights for them, not just for power." He turned to Jara, who stood frozen on the platform. "Lead them," he said. A murmur rose in the crowd, then grew into a roar. Jara stepped forward, her gaze locked with Kale's, and took the sword from his hands. She raised it high, the sunlight catching its edge. By tradition, the duel was over. The human challenger had won, but had given his victory away. The warlord, still kneeling, looked up at Kale with something like respect. "You could have taken my place," he said. "Instead, you gave it to my daughter. Why?" Kale smiled, faintly. "Because I've seen what she can do, and because I'm done fighting for thrones that aren't mine." The crowd erupted, chanting Kale's name and Jara's in the same breath. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not through conquest, but through choice. As Kale left the arena, the weight of the trials behind him, he knew one thing for certain. He had arrived on this world as a prisoner, but he would leave it as something far greater. Fate sealed by the Mace. The arena was empty now. The fires that had burned high during the duel were nothing more than dying embers, their smoke curling into the dark sky. The sand still held the marks of the final fight, Kale's footprints, the deep gouges from the warlord's sword, and a faint trail of blood that told the story of a battle no one would ever forget. Kale stood in the center, breathing in the silence. The crowds were gone, but their chants still seemed to echo in the stone walls. His arms hung at his sides, the adrenaline finally draining away. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt something heavier, like the weight of the mace he had first lifted days ago, still lingering in his bones. Above him, the great platform creaked. Jara descended the steps slowly, the silver sword strapped to her back. She wore no helmet, no ceremonial armor now, only a simple dark cloak that flowed in the wind. In her hands, she carried the Mace of Trials, the same weapon she had once handed him to humiliate him. She stopped in front of him, holding the weapon out. "This belongs to you now," she said. Kale shook his head. "It belongs to your people, and now it belongs to their leader." Her golden eyes softened, though her voice stayed steady. "Tradition says the one who lifts the mace and survives. All trials has the right to keep it. Refusing it is rare, but it means something greater." She stepped closer and lowered her voice so only he could hear. "It means your name will be written in our histories, not as ruler, not as conqueror, but as the man who could have taken everything and chose not to." Kyle's gaze went to the mace. He remembered the first time he had touched it, the way his arms had burned, the silence that had followed, the strange shift in the air as if the world itself had decided his fate. He had been a prisoner then. Now he was free. And yet he reached out and wrapped his hands around the weapon one last time. It felt the same. Cold steel, leather grip worn smooth by generations. But now it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like closure. He handed it back to her. "It was never mine to keep." Jara nodded, but he could see something behind her composure, respect, and maybe even gratitude. She turned to the rows of shadowed seats where the elders stood, their masks glinting faintly in the torchlight. "The trials are complete," she called. "By the law of Korathar, the challenger has passed. His fate is sealed." The Raven Mask elder stepped forward, his voice carrying over the empty arena. "Then let the record show. The off-worlder." Kale came to us as an outsider. He lifted the Mace of Trials, endured the 3 trials of blood, and by choice left the throne to our own. The words echoed, heavy with finality. That night, the city held a feast unlike any in living memory. Fires blazed in every district, drums pounded in the streets, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine. Children ran with wooden toys shaped like beasts from the first trial. Merchants sold small metal charms in the shape of the mace. Everywhere Kale walked, strangers called out to him, not with mockery, but with honor. Jara walked beside him, sometimes explaining the customs, sometimes saying nothing at all. But when they reached the highest balcony of the warlord's fortress, overlooking the glowing city, she finally spoke. "You've changed things here," she said. "More than you realize." Kale leaned on the stone railing, watching the torches flicker far below. "Maybe, or maybe your people just needed a reminder that strength isn't only about muscle." She looked at him for a long moment. "Where will you go now?" He shrugged. "Wherever the ship I build will take me," she smirked faintly. "If you ever come back, the Mace of Trials will still be here, waiting." When Kyle finally left Korathar weeks later, the airship that carried him rose into a dawn sky painted gold and crimson. Below, the city looked smaller than he remembered, but its people stood in the streets, watching him go. Somewhere in that crowd, Jara stood with the mace at her side. And Kale knew that even across light years, the bond forged in the arena would remain. The prophecy had been fulfilled. But the real victory was not in surviving the trials. It was in choosing his own fate.